Welcome back, AP. For those of you who are just getting back from Kairos, I know it's like 6 p.m. on Wednesday right now, but I still need you to bang this flip out if you don't mind, so we can get into some stuff on Thursday. All right, so this flip, due by Thursday, just to give you a heads up, all right? You'll see it like in your text and stuff. I'm sure you'll be getting it like on mass email from everybody. Just get it to me as fast as you can, all right? Now, anyway, we're actually talking about a lot of stuff that you probably already know a lot about, stuff that you've already interacted with, so that's really, really important. Just to go a rundown really quick, though. We talked about how the Renaissance did not help the situation in church. We talked about how the church wheels were already moving long before the Reformation, with the conciliar movement, the donation to Constantine, Lorenzo Valla finding out that that was a forgery. Talked about, like, the Great Western Schism, or also known as Babylonian captivity, right? We talked about the conciliar movement, Jan Hus, Marsilio de Padua, John Wycliffe, right? We talked about all of these other people leading up to the fabled one that you know the most about, which led to anti-clericalism, which led to anti-clericalism lashing out at pluralism and all these other things, right? We're going to review a little bit on Thursday, too, just kind of bone up on all this material so we can dive right back into it head first. But anyway, getting back after it. So, the reason why monarchs wanted the ability to appoint their church officials is due to a lot of this uproar, right? Priests didn't have civic responsibility. They didn't have to fight wars. They didn't have to pay their taxes. They didn't have to do it. They own a third of the land, right? The life in the 1500s Europe was to be a priest, okay? Because you could also break all the rules of the Benedictine rules all you wanted to, and apparently no one said anything, right? So really quick though, enter Martin Luther. Let's talk a little bit about him as a person, and we're also talking about his main objective, okay? So the complaints against the church were the fuse. Martin Luther, he's just a match, all right? Martin Luther is not as important as people make him out to be. The reason why a lot of history teachers harp on him so hard in class is due to the fact that he stands as a symbol of the Reformation. His act of nailing the 95 Theses to the door of the church in Worms, Germany, is just like a very big catalyzing event to get it to stand out in kids' minds. But here's the thing. Let's talk about him as a man a little bit. Talk about his background, all right? So first of all, he is German. Just to give you a heads up. Spoke German his entire life. Actually went to school to become, he's the son of a wealthy landowner, and he actually went to school to become a lawyer. So he actually was on his way to becoming a lawyer and would eventually change directions, right? So something Martin Luther was deathly afraid of was thunder and lightning. All right, so he's walking home from school one day, walking home from studying to be a lawyer, and a thunderstorm breaks out. Now, this is a legend, all right? This is allegedly how he decided to become a priest. He's walking home, thunder and lightning start breaking out, it starts pouring rain, he starts running, he starts flipping out. He gets down on his knees, and he's like, Saint Anne, if you save me from this storm, I will enter into your church, right? So he decides, since he didn't die in this thunderstorm, that he's going to become a priest. Well, he becomes a priest and eventually works his way up to being a professor of theology, right? Becomes a professor of theology in the early university systems that hadn't really branched out into liberal arts education yet, where literally when you went to school, you were still going to become a theologian, or you were pushing along the lines of the existential ideas of the Christian church, right? So while a professor, though, he summarized his beliefs as the following things. He's like, I believe that religion really has to, and this is before the 95 Theses, says, faith alone, Scripture alone, grace alone. He had been talking work on the Catholic Church for a long time. He actually, when he went into around the early 1500s, around 1504, 1506, he actually journeyed to Italy to see Rome. And while he was there, Michelangelo was unveiling half of the Sistine Chapel that had been completed, right? And he saw it, he was like, man, that's amazing. But outside of the Sistine Chapel, he thought Rome was squalor. Foxes, thieves, sewage, disgusting, the allowance of people to be so poor and have so little, while the Pope lived so wealthy and had so much, right? So Luther had been disgusted with the church for quite some time. He was not universally on board and then bang, he switched, right? He was kind of a part of that early movement, right? So moving forward, though, then we've got to talk about really quickly, first of all, what indulgences are, all right? So first of all, let's talk about what indulgences are, right? So everybody always says, well, you protested against indulgences. Well, we're talking about Martin Luther before he did all that, right? Well, let's get after what had been going on in Europe up to this point. So an indulgence, right? First of all, an indulgence has been around since the 11th century, or the 1000s AD, right? indulgences have been a thing for a really long time. Following some of the early Catholic reforms, indulgences were considered good deeds, right? So the main thing about indulgences, if you believe in indulgences, you have to believe in another realm, which is called purgatory, right? So if you believe in indulgences, you believe in purgatory. So purgatory, heaven's waiting room, that place where you go to be punished just enough so you can go to heaven eventually. What an indulgence was early on in the Catholic faith was a good deed to try and lessen the time that you would spend in purgatory. It could be verbal, it could be written, but basically it was given to you by a priest, right? This violates a lot of Martin Luther's ideas on faith alone, right? So, or grace alone, excuse me. So faith alone, scripture alone, grace alone. Let's backtrack a little bit and talk about those things. According to faith alone, Martin Luther believed that as long as you believed in God and God believed in you and you actually did his, followed his principles, you would be fine. Scripture alone, as in you can discover all you want from the Bible, right? So, and third, grace alone, that you did not require a priest to get to heaven, okay? Now, anyway, indulgences can be verbal or written. They're supposed to be good deeds. But in the 12th century, some rogue church officials began to hawk them. Now, what I mean by hawk them is sell them, right? So indulgences became a written piece of paper, like a get-out-of-jail-free card that you could buy, right? And, of course, that set up a lot of really, really messed up concepts because the poor could not afford these indulgences, which basically means that their soul was barred from paradise for longer than that of a wealthy individual, right? So now, a famous priest that we're going to talk about here in a minute named Johann Tetzel, go ahead and star his name, Johann Tetzel, had a very famous line from one of his advertisements to sell his indulgences, which he considered premium. And the line was, when a penny in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs, right? So basically saying the second that a penny drops into this box, your soul will be in purgatory for less time. That's really messed up. Now, anyway, so continuing forward, though. Then here comes this dummy, right? Somebody that Denny would be a big fan of. So this guy is Pope Leo X. He is a Medici Pope, right? So first of all, red flag number one, this guy has got more money than he knows what to do with as is, right? And he's following on the heels of Nicholas V, the Renaissance Pope, right? Saying, we need to beautify everything in Rome. We need to bring back the glory of the Catholic Church. And we're going to do that in style. We're going to do it with art. We're going to make everything look nice, right? Well, thing about it is, he did not have as much money as he thought he did. Now, he had a lot of money in his personal account, but he's not about to pay for these things on his own. He wants to use Catholic Church money to try and remodel St. Peter's Cathedral, right? The dome that's built on St. Peter's Cathedral was paid for with indulgence money. Isn't that messed up? One of Michelangelo's works were paid with unfair indulgence money. Money. What are you going to do, right? So, anyway, but he wants to remodel Vatican City, right? So bad priests in Germany take up his cause, and they begin to push these hard to pay off debts, right? They begin to push really hard and sell indulgences at a rapid rate to try and pay off debts to the church that these individual parishes actually owed, okay? So anyway, then this dude, Johann Tetzel. So we got two different figures in this entire little scheme. Leo X, the Medici Pope at the time, Johann Tetzel. Johann Tetzel made a huge blitz to sell these indulgences, and he did something that was really messed up. To try and sell more of them, he decided, oh, well, if you buy my indulgences, not only do they get you out of purgatory for less time, you can get a family member that's stuck there out right now. So Johann Tetzel was basically trying to sell like the Ferrari level of indulgences, right? Well, that's going to cause Martin Luther and his constituents to freak the heck out, right? So that right there, actually written in German over here, is when a penny in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. This is an advertisement. That is Johann Tetzel right there advertising his coming to sell indulgences, right? These are his indulgence. That is the coffer, okay? The coffer is actually like a box. It's the donation box. And actually, if you ever look at a ceiling and you see coffering, and it looks like the top, like you're inside of a box, that's where it comes from, coffers. Now, anyway, so, or C-O-F-F-E-R. Now, anyway, then enter Martin Luther, right? So first of all, the 95 Theses was actually a letter, all right? So a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, and then, he got real mad, and he wrote down 95 reasons why he was mad at the church, and nailed him to a door of the church, right? Blah, blah, blah. Well, it turns out that actually probably didn't happen. Chances are that he actually never nailed the theses to the door of that church. Some of you are like, well, chances, are we sure? I mean, we're not positive. Somebody could have written it and banged it up there all they wanted to. But it served as a symbol, right? Because his works, his 95 theses, were actually going to be printed and then spread very quickly. So much so that in 1519, he gets called to Rome to take back his ideas. To take back the ideas of saying, like, you don't need the church to get to heaven, that God believes in you, right? So you don't need to pay for indulgences because they are unfair and biased towards the poor. You don't need to do blah, 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 right? So the 95 Theses was a very, very poignant document and a very big shift because it challenged the authority of the church. It's a lot like the 900 Theses, but here's the thing. Did Pico Mirandola have the same access to a printing press that Martin Luther had when his ideas were published? No, right? Not to mention the fact, too, 900 Theses versus 95. It's not as easily marketable, all right? So 900 Theses, that's a lot. 95, it's a little more manageable. So it also was supposedly it filled up about the size of a piece of paper. It was actually a letter, we believe, that he actually wrote to one of his friends and colleagues. Now, he began printing pamphlets saying that popes could be wrong, right? So there was this old pope in the Middle Ages named Gregory VII who actually made a papal bull that's in a bull, it's like a decree. He actually made a papal bull and said, the Catholic Church has never done wrong and never will do wrong. Also, if you want to talk to me, if you're a king, you got to kiss my feet before we can discuss anything. So Gregory VII took it to a whole new level in the Middle Ages. So Martin Luther lashes out against that trend that they believed in and says, the popes can be wrong. All of Europe freaks out, right? Secular leaders should reform it if the Pope refuses to. Challenging the authority of the Pope. What are you doing? And then also, he said that there's no difference between a layperson and a clergy member. Literally, Martin Luther is pulling the biggest sledgehammer move you've ever seen. He's going after the weaknesses of the church based off why people during this time period were frustrated with the church, right? We were talking about early on, like, they believed that it was biased that priests didn't have to pay taxes, that they didn't have to serve in the military, that they weren't appointed by their own monarchs, that they were considered better than everyone else. So all Martin Luther did was he saw where the church was weak and boom! And just decided to bring it down to its foundations, right? Friggin' genius. I love this guy. Now, anyway, continuing forward, though, we got to talk about the papal response. So, the Pope, the Medici Pope, Leo X, is going to decide to respond by giving 2 months for Luther to show up in Rome and publicly reject his ideas. Hold on one second. I got to respond to my wife real fast. All right. Sorry about that. I have a dentist appointment tomorrow, unfortunately. It scared the living daylights out of me. But anyway, now, the Pope responded by giving 2 months for Luther to reject his ideas or face excommunication, right? And so Luther says, you won't. And then the Pope is also going to hold massive book burnings and actually burn all of the works of Martin Luther publicly. So crazy thing that's going to end up happening, Martin Luther hears of this. He hears that Leo X is holding these massive book burnings where they're burning the pamphlets and the copies of the theses that they can get their hands on and anything that he's ever published before. They're just burning the works of Luther. And so Luther takes the letter that he was sent by the Pope giving him 2 months and he decides, you want to play that game? He holds burnings in Nuremberg as well as in Worms, Germany, publicly burning a papal letter from the Pope himself. Dude, straight like thug move, right? Not kidding. Not like manliest man you've ever met. 9/10 of Germany, 9 out of every 10 people in Germany by the end of this quarrel between the two of them, and just the burnings portion, actually supported Luther even after the threats of excommunication. Because the Pope even threatened to excommunicate all of the German people or any people that believed in Protestant ideals. Now, they aren't called Protestants yet. But that right there is Leo X actually holding some book burnings. And this right here is Martin Luther burning that letter that the Pope sent him to tell him to shut up. So, straight thug move. I love it. So, anyway, continuing forward though, the big proclamation that is going to be called is like the death to the court of Rome, right? This is a big bannerment that a lot of these upset German Catholics are going to stand behind. Death to the court of Rome, right? Now, the reason why a lot of people are saying this is due to a meeting that was held, right? The Diet of Worms, which if you've had Mr. Buchanan, I guarantee you've heard of this before. It's a very major meeting. So, funny enough, this wasn't even actually called by the Pope himself, right? So the Pope decided to pull a Leo X, and he was like, you know what? I'm not even going to humor this, all right? I'm not even going to humor this garbage that this guy is putting out there. So I'm going to tell Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Empire at the time, and remember, the Holy Roman Emperor controlled what is now modern-day Germany, where Martin Luther lived and where all of his constituents lived. And he said, I'm going to force Charles V to hold a diet, and a diet's a meeting, right? And in that meeting, he is going to force Luther to publicly recant his ideas, right? And that was called the Diet of Worms. But what ended up happening is at that meeting, Luther refused to give in to the demands. They threatened excommunication. They threatened capture. They threatened arrest. They threatened death. And he said, no, I will not give in to those things. You do not need to write this quote down. But what Martin Luther apparently actually said was, unless I am convinced by the Scripture, by the evidence of Scripture, or by plain reason, I cannot and will not recant anything, for it's neither safe nor right to go against conscience. And he was like basically saying, if I feel this in my heart that I know that you're wrong, that's because God is telling me you're wrong. He would not set me up to do this. Like, he refused to do it. And he actually just walked out of the Diet of Worms. Why, though? When you had Jan Hus show up to the Council of Clermont and they burned him at the stake, that was in the 1300s. Why do you think Luther refused and he knew he was going to be immune? That is exactly right. Back there, I heard you shouting it over top of everyone. Dion Lewis, you're the best. Very nice job, Dion. That's right. Due to the impact of the printing press, due to the more rapid spread of information, had Charles V killed Martin Luther or had him excommunicated and then burned at the stake, it would have turned him into a martyr. It would have galvanized the cause behind him. Ironically enough, the same approach that Charles chose to let him go earned the same result. It got him a bigger audience. Like, actually, Martin Luther going in there and saying, shut up, death to the court of Rome, I'm not taking it back, get off me, actually earned him a much bigger audience. So, very, very impressive that you guys know that stuff. So, we're going to stop there, and that's it. So, I just wanted to cover all the Martin Luther stuff today, all right? So, and I said a lot of stuff that's not on the screen. You should just be jotting it down. The main thing you got to get down is, like, you got to know who the Pope was at the time. You need to know who Johann Tetzel is. You need to know what indulgences were, what they actually turned into. You need to know Martin Luther and his background. You need to know faith alone, grace alone, Scripture alone. You need to know the Diet of Worms, very important. You need to know Charles V, Diet of Worms, because we talk about him a lot more later on. All right, so that's basically it in a nutshell. We're going to play like a little review game probably on Thursday, and then we're going to get back into some other stuff. But I will see you guys then. I hope y'all had a great time at Kairos. I hope that it was a very enriching experience. And I appreciate everybody that stayed behind helping me get some other stuff done. So I will see you guys then. Y'all have a good evening.